Palestinian officials have released a list of over 6,700 names of Palestinians they claim were killed in Gaza since the outbreak of the conflict with Israel earlier in the month. This comes after President Biden expressed doubts about the Palestinian death toll, which is provided by Gaza's Ministry of Health, an agency in the Hamas-controlled government. If you missed those comments, let's take a look.
In the 18 days since Hamas killed 1,400 Israelis, the Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry says Israeli forces have killed over 6,000 Palestinians, including 2,700 children. You've previously asked Netanyahu to minimize civilian casualties. Do these numbers say to you that he is ignoring that message?
What they say to me is I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. I'm sure innocents have been killed, and it's the price of waging a war.
Israeli Defense Forces International spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus spoke to CNN about whether the number of targets hit by Israeli airstrikes are close to 7,000 dead. Let's watch that.
No, I cannot. I can say that it depends on the night. We have indeed struck many targets in the Gaza Strip of various sizes and of various types. We have struck between 200 and 400 targets each day, each 24 hours, so it depends. We will be doing some kind of an interim summary in terms of the activity of our troops and the activity of the Air Force, but I can assure you that we are striking Hamas wherever they are, wherever they're hiding. We're trying to really weaken their military capabilities and prepare the battlefield for the next stages.
Meanwhile, 10 humanitarian aid trucks, including 6 from the Red Cross, made it into the Gaza Strip on Friday, bringing the total to 84 in the past week. However, there is still no agreement to get fuel into Gaza, and the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency has said the absence of fuel was jeopardizing life-saving humanitarian operations there. Former Obama staffer turned podcaster Tommy Viator noted on X, this article suggests there's no clear strategy behind Netanyahu's bombing campaign in Gaza. Meanwhile, thousands of civilians are getting killed. The U.S. should push for a ceasefire to allow in humanitarian supplies and demand to see a coherent strategy. Jessica, what did you make of Biden's response there, where he cast doubt on the official count of the number of Palestinians dead? And my initial reaction to that is whether it's 4,000, 6,000, 2,000, it's obviously still a significant number of civilian casualties. I think the question is whether or not Israel is able to actually reduce those in a meaningful capacity while still being able to target Hamas and root them out of the Gaza Strip.
I think it's ridiculous, Biden's comments, especially considering that the health ministry is the data source that the State Department has used for their internal measure of how many Palestinian lives have been lost. If this is the standard, if this is what the State Department uses, yet Biden is casting doubt on it in public, it seems pretty clear to me that Biden is saying this for political reasons because there's been so much outrage about how many Palestinians have been killed. For Israel to directly say between October 7th and October 12th that they dropped 6,000 bombs on Gaza on a piece of land that's around the size and population of the island of Manhattan, for them to drop 4,000 tons of explosives on Gaza and then cast doubt on the fact that Palestinians have said the death toll is over 6,000 is ridiculous. It doesn't seem like there needs to be a lot of math and calculations that go into figuring out whether or not they could have killed 7,028 Palestinians, as we know is the official count, because the ministry has now released the names and the identification numbers for all of the people that they have marked as dead. There's also thousands more people who are missing, who are injured, who are under rubble, who have been trying to receive treatment in hospitals that have frankly shut down now because of lack of fuel due to the blockade on Gaza. So I think it's absolutely ridiculous that you have people like President Obama now calling for a humanitarian pause when the United States initially vetoed it. Vetoing that humanitarian pause is what allowed this death toll to climb. So to cast doubt on this death toll when you have a hand in it, not just because you funded the Israeli military, but because you vetoed a ceasefire that was voted on the floor of the Security Council as a country, we don't have a right to cast doubt on these claims. And I think I agree with the minister. The head minister of Gaza's health department, who was a surgeon, Bassem Naim, their spokesperson has said that the U.S. administration is devoid of human standards, morals, and basic human rights values for shamelessly questioning the validity of the death toll. They said, so we decided to go out and announce the names with details and names in front of the entire world to tell the truth about the genocidal war committed by the Israeli occupation against our people. I think it's ridiculous in a time of genocide to question whether or not those people existed in the first place when that many bombs are dropped. I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm kind of less interested in the squabbling over the official death count number and more about the conversation about what Israel's reaction to the attack on October 7th should be. Because I think one of the issues that I have is Hamas carried out this attack, obviously knowing that Israel was going to want to respond. Then as soon as they responded, they didn't like the response and started calling for a ceasefire and crying that they were doing too much. And I think fundamentally, war is messy, brutal, and despicable. Civilian lives are always going to get caught up. And so to me, it's more of a question of, is Israel doing this in a way that sort of inevitably is going to catch civilians up because of the way that Hamas does their operations? Or is there another military strategy that they could use that could root out Hamas without this high level of death?
I think it's a really good question. When I think back to Netanyahu funding the creation of Hamas in Palestine, trying to create some instability, I think, in the region so that Israel can continue to occupy more land, I think it's a problem he's kind of created himself. And so when you have 1,400 Israelis killed by Hamas, by a group of people that a lot of folks in Israel understand to be killing them with no reason, when I believe quite strongly that the people in Palestine have no way of fighting back the occupation for the simple fact that they don't have an army, they don't have a military. And so when you have 31,000 Palestinians killed in 1 year in 2018 when they tried to peacefully protest the occupation, you have to understand that the attack of Hamas was in response to an occupation that's lasted for 75 years. So if I was the Israeli government and I genuinely cared about the security of the hostages in Gaza, I would not bomb them. Now we have reports that 50 of those hostages have been killed by Israeli airstrikes. If I cared about the people living in Israel, I would not be bombing neighborhoods where the hostages likely are. And if I really cared about Israel, I would not respond with retaliation, because that could lead to greater escalation of the conflict and retaliation from neighboring countries like Iran, which we know is getting involved in proxy wars in the region. So Israel's appropriate response at that point, when 1,400 have been killed, and we know quite recently 31,000 Palestinians have been killed in just 1 year, the response should be, let's have peace talks. Let's talk about a negotiation. Let's draw lines in the sand so that this doesn't happen again. That would be what is best for the Israeli people. I think the Netanyahu regime has put the Israeli people at risk by continuing to take Palestinian land and to create groups like Hamas to make Palestine unstable. So I think it's the right thing to do peace talks at a point where you have this terrorist attack, where they're so desperate to try and communicate that they want peace, that they want Israel to stop occupying their land and taking their neighborhoods and airstriking them.
I just feel like this situation is more complicated than saying Palestine has been occupied by Israel for 70 plus years, when the Jewish people are historically displaced people. I mean, you can go back all the way to the 60s and the 70s, and I don't mean the 1960s and 1970s, when the Jews were displaced after the first Jewish-Roman War. So I just feel like this goes back way further than perhaps the Palestinian side wants to admit. So it's a little bit more complicated than just saying that Israel is responsible for this, or that Hamas was only doing this in retaliation for this unfair genocidal occupation. This is something that really goes back thousands of years. I think both people have a legitimate claim to the land there. So just telling Israel to go for peace talks and not retaliate militarily after 1,400 people are slaughtered, innocent civilians are slaughtered, I don't think is fair to them, to say that they should be the ones that have to be the bigger person in this scenario when they've just faced one of the deadliest attacks on their people.
I think if Israel had remained within the land that was claimed by the Nakba in 1948, which was done so quite violently, I think we have to fault European countries for not allowing Jewish people to live peacefully in Europe, and then ultimately, after World War II, deciding to ship them to Israel, which was a piece of land that was claimed by the British Empire. It wasn't even their land to give and make a claim with the United Nations that we need this resolution to have this land be made so that Jewish people can go live there. We should be able to send them there. They should live there peacefully. And we're going to draw some borders. Then we have the Oslo Accords, where we expand the borders a little bit for Israel. And then we have the continuation of land claims by Israel. So I think this is in response to those land claims and the creation of a state that disrupted the entire region without properly taking into account what the people already living on that land want and believe. There was a time when Jewish people and Palestinians before 1948 and after World War II coexisted on that land peacefully. And I think the United States, I think the British Empire, currently the UK, I think Western countries have a stake in creating peace in the region because they in part created it because of that. And so I think it's true to say that Jewish people should be able to live on this land peacefully. People native to Palestine should be able to live on this land peacefully. The Semites are native to this region. Palestinians are Semites. And I think we really need to have a reckoning with what that can look like without having it be solely the state of Israel. It's very clear, I think Netanyahu wants that one-state solution. And I think from a humanitarian perspective, all people can live there peacefully, and perhaps we need to scrap all of the lines we've drawn in the sand and really recognize that history for what it is, instead of messily drawing the lines after World War II and just accepting this to be the case, briefly dealing it with it in the Oslo Accords, and then just militarily sponsoring the Israeli occupation for so long. It is a more complicated issue than just 1948 to present. It has a lot of colonial roots, and I think the West really needs to reckon with all of those issues in these peace talks that I hope will come after a ceasefire that needs to happen very soon.
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to be difficult to convince Israel, considering Hamas has violated pretty much every ceasefire they've ever had in history. But we'll see. I mean, obviously, we always hope for peace in these types of situations, and also hope that the U.S. doesn't get dragged into another world war. Fingers crossed, I guess, but I'm not optimistic. More rising after this.